Welcome to the 12th, I think, third Wednesday Vesper service sponsored by UMIAC. And our preacher tonight is Rebecca Mattis of the Rutland, Vermont UU Church. Rebecca Mattis has been a UU for 15 years and attends the UU Church of Rutland, Vermont. As it happens, Rebecca is running for the UUA Board of Trustees this year on a platform of democracy and diversity of thought. However, when she agreed to do this sermon, this particular sermon, this exact sermon, she had no thoughts of running for trustee had ever occurred to her. So that you should not think of this as a campaign service. She sings in the choir, plays ukulele and penny whistle from time to time, and over the years has given 2 handfuls of sermons. Let's see here. This is the time that I put some announcements on the screen. I usually announce the next preacher. I have no idea who the next preacher is, but the next third Wednesday is July 20th, and we'll come up with somebody, we'll do something. Maybe someone who's preached for us before, maybe some new person. If you got the link for this service from that email address, you'll automatically get one for that service. Unless, of course, you opt out. If you've been forwarded the link by someone else, you may not get it. So you might want to send an email to that address. I'm now going to essay to light a chalice. First match blew up on me. I only have 4 in the box. Oh, the second just blew up on me. That is, the head came off and went flying across the table. Okay. There. Okay. We gather this hour as people of faith, having sorrows and joys and needs and gifts. We like to speak of hope as a sign of our quest for truth and meaning, and in celebration of the life we share together. It is the mission of the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council to carry out and foster anti-racist and multiracial unity activities, both within and outside the Unitarian Universalist Association, through education, bearing witness and other actions, and expansion of our membership, both within and outside the walls of our congregations. We also seek to defend our UU principles against those who seek to undermine them. We envision our congregations, denomination, and society as not being color blind, but color appreciative, as judging and treating members of the world's rank and file by the content of their character, not the color of their skin or their cultural heritage, and as treasuring diversity in the context of the beloved community. We call this vision multiracial Unitarian Universalism. This is the prize that we try to keep our eyes on, the goal, the mountaintop, the unity of light and dark-skinned people of the world. And now I give you Rebecca Mattis leading us in a meditation.
Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the attendant of truth.
Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery.
A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief.
Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which, and I can't read the word there, just a minute, which eats away the false.
Let no one fear for the truth, that doubt may consume it, for doubt is a testing of belief.
The truth stands boldly and unafraid. It is not shaken by the testing.
For truth, if it be truth, arises from each testing stronger, more secure.
Those that would silence doubt are filled with fear. Their houses are built on shifting sands.
But those who fear not doubt and know its use are founded on rock.
They shall walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure.
Therefore, let us not fear doubt, but let us rejoice in its help.
It is to the wise as a staff to the blind. Doubt is the attendant of truth. And now, let us be silent together to create an opportunity for prayer or meditation.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Rebecca has a reading now.
So the reading is from the introduction to Irving L. Janis's Victims of Groupthink, an article by Paul Hart. Groupthink stands for an excessive form of concurrence seeking among members of high prestige, tightly knit policy-making groups. It is excessive to the extent that the group members have come to value the group and their being part of it higher than anything else. This causes them to strive for a quick and painless unanimity on the issues that the group has to confront. Group members suppress personal doubts, silence dissenters, and follow the group leader's suggestions. They have a strong belief in the inherent morality of the group, combined with a decidedly evil picture of the group's opponents. The results are devastating: a distorted view of reality, excessive optimism producing hasty and reckless policies, and a neglect of ethical issues. The combination of these deficiencies makes these groups particularly vulnerable to initiate or sustain projects that turn out to be policy fiascos.
I'll figure out how to do this in a minute. We're going to do some more music here.
Usually bras
Whoop.
fit small-chested women like this.
Sorry.
Gapping. You guys, look at how
Sorry. I am
Wake now, my senses, and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in awe. Keep with the web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving, as love shows us how. Wake now, my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor, both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now, my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now, my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
now I have to make sure that I don't go. Now I have to get out of. You can tell how inexperienced I am here. I have to. There we go. There. Sorry. I apologize about the underwear ad. I'm a premium member of YouTube, and that means no ads, and yet we got an underwear ad, so I apologize. Rebecca, Dick Burkhardt, you have your hand up. Is there something you wanted to say right now? I didn't think so. Okay, Rebecca, the podium is yours.
All right. Once again, I want to say this is not a campaign speech. I wrote this some time ago. The decision-making process leading up to the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster of 1986 has been referenced by many scholars as an example of groupthink. Groupthink refers to the erosion of moral judgment and reality testing that results from in-group pressures. The reason it applies here is that the physical problem that caused the disaster, deterioration of seals called O-rings, was known to their manufacturer, Morton Thiokol, and to NASA well before the disaster. The very night before the launch, top engineers from that company strongly advised to wait for warmer temperatures before launching. And the higher level managers duly made the same recommendation to NASA. However, Larry Malloy, the rocket booster project manager at NASA, expressed his frustration about delays and objected to the manufacturer's recommendation. Shortly thereafter, the manufacturer's executive team reversed their decision and voted unanimously to recommend Challenger's launch. The next morning, millions of Americans and their children watched as 7 astronauts died. The engineers who fought so hard to delay the launch displayed moral courage, which is what's required for a person to stand against the rest of the group in order to serve the group. That is the first half of how to avoid groupthink. In this sermon, I wish to discuss the second half, reality testing, and the in-group pressures themselves. These days, in a time of global disasters like climate change and the pandemic, there is quite a bit of interest in science. I also see quite a bit of politically motivated attacks on science, and I'm guessing many of you have seen this too. Sometimes these attacks really upset me, and to calm myself down, I try to view the situation through the lens of evolutionary psychology. Group belonging is, evolutionarily speaking, a requisite for survival, and it therefore exerts incredible pressures upon our individual understandings of reality. This idea helps to explain why, for example, someone would ignore ever-increasing global temperature averages and say instead, "It's snowing, there is no global warming." Maybe they say this just because their tribe says it. Because I cherish science, I wish to understand it better. Richard Feynman said this about science: "We have found it of paramount importance that in order to progress, we must recognize our ignorance and leave room for doubt. Our freedom to doubt was born out of a struggle against authority in the early days of science. It was a very deep and strong struggle. Permit us to question, to doubt, to not be sure. I think that it is important that we do not forget this struggle and thus perhaps lose what we have gained. Herein lies a responsibility to society." End quote. When I first read this quote, it kind of blew my mind. When I see science as being under attack, I can feel uneasy hearing that doubt within science is paramount. It does make sense to me though. Unlike math or logic, in science we can never prove theories true. We can only prove them false. If a spacecraft explodes, some part of our understanding was definitely faulty. On the other hand, if a spacecraft lands successfully on Mars, it doesn't mean our understanding is 100% perfect. It means our scientific knowledge was sufficiently good to get us there, which means our understanding of spaceflight is pretty darn good. But notwithstanding our success, it is likely that some of the theories we depend upon for interplanetary exploration are not quite perfectly complete. From humanity's first inklings that nature has discoverable rules, we have progressed in understanding through Newtonian physics, through Einstein's theory of relativity, to quantum physics, and who knows what is next. Science may not have absolute truths, but it does have principles. Holding to these principles produces more robust knowledge about our world. In the mid-20th century, sociologist Robert Merton introduced his 4 principles of good scientific research: communalism, universalism, disinterestedness, and organized skepticism. These are now called the Mertonian norms. Of particular interest to me now are the second and fourth principles. Universalism means that anyone can be a scientist, regardless of sex, color, nationality, etc., and that all scientific claims should be scrutinized equally, regardless of the identity of the scientist. Organized skepticism means that the acceptance of all scientific work should be conditional on assessments of its scientific contribution, objectivity, and rigor. Within this fourth principle of organized skepticism, I wish to highlight integrity and truth-telling, since scientific research continues to be plagued by data falsification, fabrication, and cherry picking. And then there's the replication crisis, a gigantic problem in scientific endeavor, which came to light in the 21st century, especially within sociology, psychology, and medicine, in which vast percentages of published studies, well over 50% in some fields, present results that are not reproducible and therefore of questionable validity. In the past decade, scientists have made a great deal of effort to address the crisis with focused reforms. I want to stress that the fallibility of human beings does not invalidate the principles of the scientific method. The existence of doubt does not erase the existence of facts. Ultimately, the spaceship either lands or explodes. I believe each of us has a responsibility to see that it lands. Yuval Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, says the following: "The scientific revolution has not been a revolution of knowledge. It has been, above all, a revolution of ignorance. The great discovery that launched the scientific revolution was the discovery that humans do not know the answers to their most important questions." I share this quote to begin drawing some parallels between science and Unitarian Universalism. It's almost a standing joke that Unitarian Universalists do not know the answers to their most important questions. But why should we? If you think you know all there is to know, you stop searching for the truth. In that way, Unitarian Universalism must be a non-creedal religion, because that's our fourth principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As historian Daniel Boorstin said, "The greatest enemy of knowledge isn't ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge." Richard Feynman described the freedom to doubt as a struggle that must be kept up in order to maintain scientific progress. He called this struggle a social responsibility. In this way, he is taking his understanding of science and using it to make a moral claim. That is what I am doing here as well. My claim has to do with two principles of science that might appear at first to be paradoxical, but are not. I am arguing for doubt and disagreement, while also arguing for facts, evidence, and reality testing. My argument is this: in the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the free part is the freedom to doubt and disagree, and the responsible part is what must be grounded in reality and integrity. Here's a little joke for you. A visitor to a Unitarian Universalist church sat through the sermon with growing outrage at the heretical ideas being spouted. After the sermon, a UU asked the visitor, "So how did you like it?" "I can't believe half the things that minister said," cried the visitor. The UU replied, "Oh, good, then you'll fit right in." The freedom to doubt and the freedom to disagree. This is, to me, what liberal religion is all about. I have been a UU for 15 years, and the churches I've attended have been members of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I don't know if most UUs interact with the UUA that much. Until recently, I never really did. For most of this time, my main point of contact with the UUA has been reading the print publication UU World. Over that decade and a half, I would describe the UU World as a magazine that offered spiritual advice and exploration as interpreted through the diverse narratives of theology, history, and current events, with a big focus on social action, as there has been within our religion from the beginning. There's an ebb and flow to the ideas presented in the magazine. I noticed particularly several years ago when the magazine, as a voice of the UUA, seemed to be searching for a specifically spiritual center for our religion, which can be hard to find without a creed. I think the UUA has been worried about declining membership in UU congregations and has been trying various strategies to attract and keep new members, including trying to define Unitarian Universalism as something other than a giant question mark. And I have a fair amount of sympathy for this desire, although I do love that question mark. And so for most of my time as a UU, the UU World was a source of insight and inspiration. But now for me, that's no longer true. Something has changed. From my point of view, the magazine has gone from doubtful and faithful searching, inclusive of diverse perspectives and well-grounded in its principles, to what I consider to be morally incoherent certainties. It no longer encourages spiritual growth. It dictates personal conscience. Before I give supporting evidence for that assertion, I will also say that it is not only the UU World doing so. It is the UUA itself, along with its Ministerial Fellowship Committee and the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, the UUMA. For example, the minister of the UU Church of Spokane, Washington, Reverend Todd Eckloff, wrote a 150-page pamphlet called The Gadfly Papers and handed out copies at the 2019 UUA General Assembly. The pamphlet contained criticism of the Unitarian Universalism for what Reverend Eckloff perceived to be illiberalism and identitarianism within it, and asserted that speech is not violence. The very day after he released his pamphlet, 485 UU ministers signed a letter denouncing it, although I wonder how many of them even had a chance to read it. This letter did not quote a single argument that Reverend Eckloff had made. It did not engage with the content of his pamphlet in any way. It was evidently enough for them to believe that the pamphlet was somehow harmful for those ministers to censure him. When he refused to participate in what he saw as unfair disciplinary proceedings, he was disfellowshipped in June 2020 by the Ministerial Fellowship Committee of the UUA. Another minister, Reverend Rick Davis of the UU Church of Salem, Oregon, was fired from his elected position within the UUMA in April 2020 for speaking publicly in support of Reverend Eckloff. A UU lay minister, Mel Pine of Northern Virginia, had his name and poetry removed from the worship web of the UUA's website in May 2017, after he wrote a blog post criticizing what he saw as a disruption of the democratic process within the UUA. An acquaintance of mine, a UU minister, was suspended from the UUMA after publicly supporting Reverend Eckloff's right to free speech and is now being threatened with disfellowship from the UUA. There is so much more to these stories. I cannot possibly explain all the details in one sermon or even 20 sermons. There's always more to the story. But I want you to know two things. The first is that in each of these stories, the censurers justified their actions with the idea that speech is harmful. The second is that when some ministers were speaking to each other in support of Reverend Eckloff's right to publish and distribute his pamphlet, and against his censure by the UUA and other UU organizations, more than a few ministers said, "I would love to sign a public letter of support, but I am afraid." Groupthink is one thing. Group purges are something else. And when these purges take place within my own liberal religion, an organization of people for whom heresy has been a point of pride, all I can do is hold all the more faithfully to our principles, to be one of a small but growing number of voices trying to preserve them. Meanwhile, there is hardly an article in the UU world, hardly an email from the UUA president that does not assume how I feel or tell me what to think and how to act. I tell you, sometimes when I'm reading these articles or emails, I just think to myself, I want my religion back. It seems to me that the UUA, lacking a creedal basis for spiritual centeredness, has found comfort in its own powerful sense of moral authority and political certainty. I will choose just one example to show you what I mean. The fall 2020 issue of the UU World features the following instruction on its cover: "Stop calling the police." Inside, the article says, quote, "Once congregations name the truth of policing being anti-Black and oppressive, they must work on alternatives to calling the police." We are also told to make a commitment to closing prisons and ending policing. A few months ago, I received an email from the UUA telling me that reacting to these directives with concerns about safety and lawlessness is, quote, fear-mongering. There are many things I object to about this. First, it isn't the truth that policing is anti-Black and oppressive. That is an opinion, and it is debatable, by which I mean reasonable and conscientious people can disagree with each other about it. Second, the UUA shouldn't be giving us directives on social policy and personal behavior, period. They should give us things to think about and talk about, not things to obey. Third, I believe we should listen to the people whose lives may be most affected by any given policy. According to a 2020 Gallup poll, 81% of Black Americans want the same amount of policing or more policing in their communities. When the UUA orders us to commit to abolishing the police, they are ignoring a huge majority of Black voices. Fourth, I get really angry when socioeconomically fortunate people, say of people who live in less peaceful neighborhoods, let them go without the protection of law enforcement. Messaging from the UUA saying I must support the abolition of police and prisons is probably not going to kill me. But if you ask me, such policies can be deadly, indirectly at least. If you do an internet search for the Ferguson effect and the Minneapolis effect, you will see abundant discussion of studies indicating that reduction in policing results in a rise in homicides. For example, according to CNN, after the murder of George Floyd, the murder rate went up 30% in American cities in the year 2020, which was the highest increase in homicide in modern history. This increase disproportionately impacted Black Americans. A data scientist at Reuters News, Isaac Kriegman, reported in a long memo last year that according to his analysis of multiple studies over multiple years, the decline in proactive policing caused 2,500 additional murders on the low end, 10,000 on the high end. Is it true? Was he right? I don't know. That's a big number of lives lost, though. And his explanation is compelling enough that I believe policy promoters have the responsibility to carefully examine the studies. In a religion whose second principle is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, it is appropriate and necessary that UUs have conversations about social policy. In the words of Sam Harris, if you care about justice, and you absolutely should, you should care about facts and the ability to discuss them openly. Justice requires contact with reality. It simply isn't the case. It cannot be the case that the most pressing claims on our sense of justice need come from those who claim to be most offended by conversation itself. End quote. With good discussions, we will be better able to make moral decisions in the wider world. During these discussions, I will admit to my own ignorance. I will argue using facts and evidence. That's the only way to get close to the truth. But nowadays, from what I see, the UUA doesn't want this free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It has failed this principle on 2 counts. In the part that should encourage doubt and disagreement, and in the part that should be scrupulous about facts and evidence. In my opinion, UUA leadership wants to be seen as pure, and it is willing to fire ministers and deplatform lay people and dismiss and disparage concerned voices and promote potentially disastrous policies in order to achieve that purity. The night before the Challenger disaster in 1986, engineers were pounding the table in passionate doubt that proceeding with the launch would be a responsible thing to do. They had evidence supporting their urge to delay, but it was brushed aside in favor of what amounted to a kind of idealistic belief in the infallibility of NASA. It turns out that groupthink is not a good foundation for science. As Richard Feynman said in the wake of the disaster, for a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled, end quote. Science and Unitarian Universalism. Both can be said to be founded upon principles instead of certainties. Because both take stances against dogmatism, and because both are about the search for truth, both must admit of doubt and disagreement in order to keep their integrity. In science, the focus by scientists on the replication crisis is a beautiful demonstration that science is working as it should. I hope that Unitarian Universalism can apply our principles similarly. And as for UU people, I know from experience that our congregations have done all kinds of wonderful work within our communities. It is certainly true of my own church, which has done great things with zero authoritarian pressure to conform or agree. All we have done has been done in love and in freedom. I'd say that is one piece of good evidence that the free and responsible search for truth and meaning is alive and well among Unitarian Universalists.
Thank you, Rebecca. We don't have a real offering, of course, but we always plug our own organization. We stumbled into being viewed by the UUA as an enemy. We're interested in promoting multiracial unity using the 7 UU principles. That's our mission. Recently, in a letter from the executive vice president of the UUA, we were informed that our mission was incompatible with the core values of the UUA. My goodness. We had the unfortunate experience of, see, we want to promote multiracial unity, and we can't help but think that the greatest obstacle to multiracial unity in our congregations is the supposedly anti-racist, but we feel in a subtle and important way, very racist approach of the UUA. And so, we could use your dough if you'd like to join us. $30 a year, it helps underwrite things that we do. I'll stop talking, but take a look at our website there, umiac.org. There's lots of interesting reading by a lot of talented people. And now we come time for closing words by, let's see here. Closing words led by Rebecca.
All set?
Just a second. Here we go. There we go.
All right.
Are we going to do this responsively, or are you going to do the whole thing?
We'll do it responsively.
Okay.
Our faith and knowledge thrive by exercise, as well as our limbs and complexion.
If the waters of truth flow not in a perpetual progression, they sicken into a muddy pool of conformity and tradition.
The light which we have gained was given us not to be ever staring on, but by it to discover onward things more remote from our knowledge.
Where there is much desire to learn, there of necessity will be much arguing, much writing, many opinions.
Give me liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties.
And now, let me see here. More music. Hopefully without an underwear ad. No?
I can turn anyone into a beach bum.
Yeah, I want my money back.
To seek the
I think that hymn was composed for the service of celebration at.
Please stand and
Whoops.
join us.
I'm sorry, I'm still
I'm gonna
on.
lay down my sword and shield.
Excuse me. I still had YouTube on. I'm going to get my money back for those ads. That hymn was composed for the religious service that took place, I think, in 1960 at Symphony Hall in Boston, celebrating the merger or the consolidation, the combination of the Unitarians and the Universalists. I'm pretty sure that's true.
Can't hear you, Richard.
Oh, you can't hear me. Is that true of everyone?
Are you too far away from the mic?
Yes, you're mumbling, Richard. Speak up.
Your volume needs to go up. Yeah.
I said it's my opinion that hymn was composed for the religious service that took place, I think, in 1960 at Symphony Hall in Boston, celebrating the upcoming consolidation of the Unitarians and the Universalists, the hymn that we just saw. Rebecca has a benediction.
This is by Hosea Ballou. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace.
I found that if we now stop recording, that we can have a more fruitful conversation than if the recording continues. So I'm going to stop the recording.